Good evening again, everyone. This is Clare Lopez, Lopez Liberty LLC, coming to you from the United West and Sharia Crime Stoppers. And tonight, I thought we would talk about a couple of things. Part of it over there, and part of it back home here. There's a lot going on. So this could be a little bit long tonight, but I do hope that it will be interesting for you and keep your interest throughout. So let me start with a look at what's going on in the Middle East, which involves the United States, of course, too. And then we'll bring it back home, and I will talk a little bit about the street insurrection, critical race theory especially, and what is overall a Marxist revolution here at home. So I will call the first part of this Middle East tectonic plates moving. That's how I think about it. It is that remarkable. It is perhaps, as a good friend Jed Babin wrote at The Spectator just yesterday, perhaps now the most important realignment of forces in decades is taking place in the Middle East, probably since World War II. All those years ago. So we are coming to you here tonight on Monday, September 14, and tomorrow on Tuesday, September 15, there will be the signing ceremony at the White House, which will take place at 12 noon Eastern Time. That signing ceremony will formalize agreements between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and between Israel and Bahrain. And that is to normalize relations overall among those countries. These are not just peace treaties, and I think we hear that term, peace treaties, used a lot in description of these agreements, but I would say this goes way beyond peace treaties. Peace treaties exist between Egypt and Israel, between Jordan and Israel, and those just mean an absence of hostilities, a status of non-belligerence, no war. But the United Arab Emirates never was at war with Israel, and so it's not per se a peace treaty. These agreements, brokered by the Trump administration, are far more wide-ranging. And they're going to be including not just an exchange of ambassadors and embassies in each other's capitals, but a full range of relations between the two countries, each, Israel and United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain. They will include things like open air travel between the countries, collaborative work in agriculture and medicine, other kinds of technology, water, so important in the Middle East. You know, things like conservation of water and the best use of water, drip irrigation in agriculture, desalinization, things like that, and many other technological areas. Now, many are watching right now and fully expecting that there will be other Middle East and perhaps North African countries, perhaps Oman, perhaps Sudan, perhaps Morocco, that will follow suit, and shortly, soon. But most important to realize is that Saudi Arabia is in agreement with all of this. And perhaps it too, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, also will join the group in due time. But it's already allowing Israeli flights, air travel, overflights of Saudi territory, which it did not do ever before. And this saves, of course, a great deal of time and gasoline or diesel, whatever the airplanes use, on those trips that would go between Israel and the Gulf states. Now, let's look backwards a little bit to how we came to this point, and back about 3 years. Let's go back to May 2017. And that's when President Trump, remember, newly inaugurated January of that year, 2017, he went to Riyadh and he spoke there to the assembled leadership of the Sunni world. They had been called to the event by King Salman of Saudi Arabia, and Trump spoke to them not as a supplicant for their favor or their cooperation, but as an equal. And even as I said at the time in a talk on Capitol Hill, that, by the way, lost me a board membership because it wasn't welcome to talk about how Saudi Arabia could actually be changing. Never mind. Trump was actually speaking to that assembled group of Sunni leaders, in my view, a little tongue-in-cheek, yes, but as capo di tutti capi, right? He had spent decades building hotels and casinos in places like New Jersey and New York, dealing with the mob, the mafia in those places to get those projects done. He knew how to deal with the mafia. Well, that's what I was kind of meaning here. These are the mob bosses of the Sunni world. And they respected him back. He respected them, and they recognized him and respected him back as well. Now, I think that was the opening as far as the United States goes. Now, of course, Israel had been at this, working towards normalization of relations behind the scenes for many, many years already, even at that point in 2017. So this was the point at which the United States and the Trump administration really entered into this process. But Israel had been at it for a long, long time before. And so they too put a great deal of effort into this. Now, a number of events aligned to make this all possible. The most important of all, I would say, is the commonly perceived threat from a rapidly nuclearizing Iranian regime. And it's not just Israel, but the Sunni arch rivals of Iran, Shiite Iran, the Saudis, the arch rivals, who are concerned, especially concerned about the behavior of this rogue jihadist regime in Tehran. And then, of course, this follows on 8 years of reckless behavior by the Obama administration that empowered and enriched Tehran, not to mention the Muslim Brotherhood. But this alarmed all of these Gulf states, except Qatar, by the way. We have to accept Qatar in all of this that we're talking about. But the other GCC states, Gulf Cooperation Council states, right? Now, geostrategically, and again, looking back, I think many observers now realize that President George W. Bush busted the very rough, but it was real, Shiite-Sunni balance of power in the Middle East when the US took out Saddam Hussein, but allowed the jihadist Tehran regime to remain, knowing that it was aggressive, expansionist, terror-supporting, and all the rest. And since that time, Tehran has grown only more aggressive, more belligerent, more supportive of Islamic jihad groups across the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, Taliban a little further afield, and so forth, continuing to destabilize the entire region. Now, the GCC countries, and in particular Saudi Arabia, already have got their hands full confronting, facing down, suppressing Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, the Muslim Brotherhood. And at some point, I think they kind of realized they could not take on Iran too all by itself, or by themselves, say that. And so this was a shrewd move on the part of these GCC countries and the Saudis, if and when they join the others. It's not just some sudden goodness of the heart that struck them all, like, the Grinch in Who Land at Christmas time, right? Now, here's another aspect of this. Many of these senior Sunni leadership figures across the region have grown just really tired of the endless Palestinian begging and whining and refusing to do anything for themselves to improve their own situation. Their hands out always for free money in return for nothing. Their repeated rejection of peace offer after peace offer. And many of these Sunni leadership figures that used to fund the Palestinians and deal with them, quite close relationships they had. But they're done with them now. They're like up to here. And they're no longer going to allow the Palestinians to wield veto power over their relationships with Israel. That's what we see happening right now. Now, finally, I would say that the GCC countries, especially, but elsewhere too, have slowly come to realize that Israel poses no threat to any of them, but rather has a great deal to offer in terms, as we spoke before, of technology expertise in so many of these different areas, and they've come to their senses. Now, it seems so long ago already, but early part of this year, January 2020, 9 months ago, the Trump administration finally unveiled the peace plan of the century, as it was called, which offered the Palestinians their last chance to be reasonable. It was a very generous offer that had gone through extensive negotiations and drafting and redrafting. And it offered the Palestinians statehood, air and sea access out of their landlocked areas. For example, the use of seaports, Israeli seaports on the Mediterranean Sea, and massive investment in their economy to help the people in return for demilitarization. And yes, that would have included Hamas as well as the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Liberation Organization, Fatah. No right of return to Israel, and recognition of the Jewish state of Israel. Well, I think most of those involved in that drafting probably knew before it was even done, the ink dry on it, that it was dead on arrival. But they wanted to show good faith, and that then unveiled, as I said earlier this year, laid the groundwork for this initiative now to follow, because these Gulf states, and as I said, other Islamic countries elsewhere, can now see and say, yes, Israel and America, you have done the most you could possibly do to make an offer to the Palestinians. This was an incredibly generous offer, and they refused it. And that gives them the cover to be able to move forward with these normalizations of relations with Israel. Now, part of the current deals also include, and this was quite debated, and there are those who are very much not in agreement with this. Members of the senior Israeli government leadership, for example, or very well-respected writers and commentators like Caroline Glick, for example, who writes for the Jerusalem Post. But Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, were persuaded for the moment to shelve the application of sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty, over the Jordan Valley and parts of other parts of Judea and Samaria. And that was, I think, the final piece that brought the UA into this agreement, and the others to follow. So the signing ceremony will take place on the White House lawn tomorrow. The weather forecast seems to indicate it's going to be a very nice day, weather-wise. Unfortunately, however, there will be very many anti-Bibi, anti-Trump Jews out in front of the White House protesting against this agreement. They're going to be right there alongside of the viciously anti-Semitic Antifa and Black Lives Matter movement protesters. Going to have to see how that all goes down. Now, sadly, too, out of the European countries, only Hungary, as I understand it right now, out of all the EU countries, will send a representative to the White House for the ceremony, the signing ceremony tomorrow. The Europeans absolutely hate both Bibi and Trump. And there's no love lost for Israel either among a number of them. And they see this just exactly in the same way as Iran and Ramallah do. That is, as a marginalization of the Palestinians. Now, Trump has pulled off what many thought was impossible for years and years. The Egyptian agreement, the Jordanian peace agreement, now being many, many years in the past. But they've held, those agreements, those peace treaties have held, but nothing since then in all these years. But Trump has just now pulled it off. It was thought impossible. And he has been honored by not just one, but 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations. The one for brokering these arrangements, Israel plus the UAE plus Bahrain, but the other Nobel Peace Prize nomination for brokering economic cooperation and trade talks between Serbia and Kosovo, which, as you know, is a breakaway province of Serbia, and long, very relationships between them very hostile. Well, the Trump administration has brokered at the start of it anyway, economic cooperation and trade talks between the two. Now, these 2 nominations come, one from a Swedish member of that parliament, and the other one a member of the Parliament of Norway. Those were the nominating figures, the members of parliament in those 2 countries. Now, we'll have to actually see if he wins on either nomination, but can't think of anyone more deserving, actually deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize than President Trump. I mean, think back. They gave one to Yasser Arafat, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, all of the Israeli, Begin, and so forth, got Nobel Peace Prizes for their roles in brokering peace agreements back when. This one is, or these 2 agreements certainly merit a Nobel Peace Prize at this time. We shall see. Now, let me sound a cautionary note here before I finish with this topic here. These Islamic countries are not establishing relations with Israel because they're abandoning Islam or jihad or Sharia or anything like that. Although the Saudi Supreme Court, I don't know if you caught this, a bit earlier this year, just did the unthinkable. They abolished the hudud punishment of flogging in Saudi Arabia. That's amazing. That is the first time I know of that an Islamic country and its legal system officially have passed a legal ruling, established a legal ruling that counters Sharia. Some of them just ignore it, right? And they just don't fulfill it. But this is the first time you've got the Supreme Court of Saudi Arabia abolishing flogging. I thought that was significant. And that, of course, is on top of all these other changes in the social mores in the kingdom. Yes, in opportunistic pursuit of MBS, that's Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince's Vision 2030 plans, which have very much to do with improving the Saudi economy. And to do that, they need to attract a lot of foreign investment and technology, which is not going to be so keen to be coming, with that technology, with that funding, if chop, chop, square and the flogging is going on every Friday after prayers. So yes, it's self-serving. Yes, it's opportunistic, but hey, it's real. It's happening. We'll take it. And yes, we will keep pushing, or we should keep pushing the Saudi kingdom for more improvements in its human rights record. So this entire shift, tectonic plates shift in the Middle East, is definitely about survival in different ways. We talked about economics for the Saudis, but actual literal survival perhaps too. The GCC countries, as I said before, minus Qatar, are terrified of Iran, which, as I said before too, is backing Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iraqi Hashd-e-Shabi, those Shiite terror militias there, Yemeni Houthis. They're working with the Taliban, just like pre-9/11, by the way. Another story. Even as Iran, in violation of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which it remains a signatory, and the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action from July 2015, to which it remains, well, not a signatory because nobody signed it, but a partner in the agreement. But despite those memberships or affiliations with those agreements, Iran's regime is continuing to drive for deliverable nuclear weapons. This terrifies the Sunni countries of the Gulf region. And beyond that, the Saudis certainly know, as do the others, that the real prize in the Sunni Shiite hostility standoff of all these centuries are Mecca and Medina, the two holy places, as Muslims would call them. Those are the real prizes. And with everything else, these countries and Saudi Arabia need Israel and the United States right now to help them, to stand with them, to form an alliance, a credible deterrent to Iran just across the Persian Gulf from them. Now, that, I would note, though, does not explain other more geographically distant Islamic countries like Morocco and Sudan, both of which are spoken of currently as likely to normalize ties with Israel also. So stay tuned. And yes, we know that a hudna is not supposed to last any longer than 10 years, but both Egypt and Jordan have surpassed that time limit as of now. So I think in summing up here on this topic, establishing facts on the ground is what this is really all about. These agreements, and any more to come following on, will create so many interstate, commercial, and personal linkages that it will be very difficult to undo later on. That's the point. I'm not going to say it's impossible, it can never happen, but it makes it more difficult. And that's the point of doing all this. Now, my own assessment is that these actions have been approved at the OIC level, that is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the 57-member head of government organization of all Islamic governments in the world, 56 countries, plus the Palestinian Authority makes 57 members. I expect that this decision about moving forward in this way probably was discussed, perhaps argued over at the OIC. And the decision was to allow Turkey, Erdogan's neo-Ottoman jihadist Turkey, to take the jihad lead, or at least the kinetic jihad lead, together in a loose alignment with Iran and Qatar. This is perfect illustration of what our good friend Steve Coughlin would call the Maoist splinter movement theory, which holds that as those more out there at the edge of the envelope, pushing the more kinetic, the more violent jihad activity, as they push that envelope, any who fall behind them in lesser pursuit of violent kinetic jihad seem more moderate. That's Maoist splinter movement theory. And that's what's going on here. So the others are naturally going to be seen as more moderate by contrast. I mean, anything is more moderate by contrast than, you know, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, or the Taliban. But here's where I think this is going. I think that these states, the GCC and perhaps others that will come along, I think that their focus, and again, I suspect this was talked about and agreed to at OIC meetings, head of state meetings, that the shift for these countries that will now normalize relationships across the board with Israel, they are obligated to continue jihad. They may not abandon it, but it doesn't have to be kinetic jihad all the time. So I think these countries are going to be pursuing interfaith dialogue as their jihad, their contribution to jihad. The UAE already leads that initiative, the Interfaith Dialogue Initiative campaign across the world. And it's been very successful, I'm sorry to say, among gullible Christians and Jews. And they're in Abu Dhabi, on a site in the capital, in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE. They're already constructing a church, mosque, and synagogue together on a single site, kind of arranged in a circular formation. And I will conclude then this section on the Middle East with a saying from my dear grandmother, long since now passed on, but she used to say, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. I think they must know that saying too. All right, let me move back here home again to the United States and talk about this Marxist, Leninist, Maoist street insurrection. And in particular tonight, I want to focus on critical race theory in our government, our schools, and our society. At the outset here, I will refer you to a website which I think is quite good with a lot of information about critical race theory. It's a website established by mathematician, historian, author James Lindsay, Lindsey, and the website is www.newdiscourses.com, newdiscourses.com. You can find a lot about critical race theory there. Now, what is it? What is critical race theory, and how does it play into what's going on in our country and on our streets right now? Well, it's a worldview that sees everything through a racial lens. Every aspect of life, every relationship, every interaction. No one may be judged, no one is judged on the content of their character, as Martin Luther King said, as individuals, but rather it's all about groups. It's about your social identity based only on skin color plus political thought. Now, that racist skin color may be Caucasian, could be Asian, Hispanic, Arab, Asian Indian, even lighter skinned blacks, or simply blacks who dare to disagree. Candace Owens comes to mind. So does Leo Terrell, Thomas Sowell, and so many others. So critical race theory is more about a mentality, as I said, a worldview, than anything that's actually genetic. Now, it's also not about the actual opportunities that exist in US society or the US legal system, which mandates equal treatment on a level playing field. Even when that is violated, as it is, human beings make mistakes, make errors. But that the worldview of critical race theory says that all outcomes must also be absolutely leveled by mandate, not just the opportunity to achieve, but the actual achievement of whatever you're seeking to do. Now, I stand 5'6". I am never in my lifetime going to be able to dunk a basketball. It's just not happening. But that doesn't mean that I'm being discriminated against because I was born with the potential to grow to 5 feet 6 inches. But that is what we're talking about. If everybody is not able to achieve a 6-bedroom home in the suburbs with a Mercedes-Benz in the driveway and a 6-figure salary, then that's racist. That's racist. Okay, this is where this goes to. Now, where'd this come from? So critical race theory was originally associated with the Marxist Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School, named after the city in Germany, yes, Frankfurt, Germany, where Soviet Marxists, shortly after the Soviet Revolution, the Russian Revolution of 1917 took place, the Soviets then created something called the Soviet Comintern. Comintern is short for Communist International, and it was the vehicle by which the Soviets intended to spread communism throughout the world. And their first sights were set on Germany because they assessed it to be the most likely or vulnerable. And that is how they wound up in Frankfurt with what's come to be called the Frankfurt School. Now, leading figures of the Frankfurt School, some of these might be familiar to you, include Herbert Marcuse and others whose names may be less familiar, but they were Marxists, they were communist, and they were determined to export communism internationally. They tried first in Germany, and it was there in the 1920s that critical race theory was first defined in the 1920s by an individual named Max Horkheimer of the Frankfurt School of Social Sciences, Frankfurt School of Social Sciences, in his essay, which was called Traditional Theory and Critical Theory. And in there, it was explained that there was a utopian vision of human society on Earth that could only be achieved through centralized government and a welfare state applied via the Hegelian dialectic of progressivism, through a continual playing out of contradictions and tensions against one another, change brought about through the progressivist course of history. Steve Coughlin and Rich Higgins do an excellent job of explaining this, far better than I could ever do, at their website called Unconstrained Analytics. Check it out. They've published quite a number of very interesting and informative papers and essays there. Unconstrained Analytics, Steve Coughlin and Rich Higgins. Now, up against this critical race theory way of looking at the world, any use of actual critical thinking, logic, science, rational thought is, according to them, ipso facto evidence of racism itself. Everything's white. And anyone who disagrees, of whatever color or race they may be, is therefore white. Yes, even Candace Owens. Or white supremacist. This is total amygdala thinking. Amygdala being the base of the brainstem, the reptilian base of what developed eventually into a human brain. It kind of bypasses the frontal cortex. And instead of logic and reasoning and critical thinking, those who espouse critical race theory promote instead storytelling and personal emotional experiences and perceptions, your lived experiences, how you feel and see the world through your life. All of that takes precedence over any kind of scientific facts or scientific method, because those, the latter, were produced mostly by white Western men. So you see how it is. This is a closed circle. You can never, ever prove critical race theory wrong in any way because even attempting to discuss it proves your racism. This is what they say. Now, this situation, as applied to the United States and more broadly to the West, to Western civilization, I would say, can only be corrected with a totalitarian, tyrannical, authoritative central government control of everything and everyone, to enforce everyone to be openly and demonstrably anti-racist. Although you can never meet the mark, you can never be anti-racist enough. You just have to keep producing. Now, this means kneeling for the national anthem. It means flying a Black Lives Matter flag over your city hall. It means vacating your privately owned home to the mob in the street to give it gratis to the Black Lives Matter movement anarchists out there. And even then, it might not be enough because, well, they could say, you're only doing it in self-interest to save yourself. So there's no way it can ever be satisfactory. Now, there's an author who, together with her book, has become wildly popular of late. Her name is Robin DiAngelo. You may have heard of her. And she's the author of a book called White Fragility. It's wildly popular among certain groups. And it is not about the liberal kind of humanism, real liberals, real humanism that would include individualism, liberty, a harmony within society among people. No, rather it is totally against free choice or individual liberty of any kind, or even equality before the law, because all of those, according to critical race theory, conspire to keep racial minorities down, and only social justice will do. Now, the only solution then is total revolution. Tear down America, tear down our existing society. And this is what you hear them calling for out in the street. And it coincides perfectly with the Communist Manifesto right here and Mao's little red book, which I've recently read and tabbed through, with complete disdain for the individual in favor of a focus on group identity and society as a whole. For the communists, the divisions in society were about economic class. But given the opportunity available in America, it was beyond evident that division by class, economic class, would not rouse up the masses in revolution against free market capitalism, and therefore Marx's class warfare, class divisions, was replaced by race divisions. Now, back to our friend Steve Coughlin again, back in November of 2019, he issued an essay, a very good one, well, they're all very good, but on his website, again, Unconstrained Analytics, and it's called Warning on Race. And that essay forecast what we are seeing that has exploded on our streets throughout this year of 2020. He explained that race grievances would be used for organized destruction in pursuit of the Marxist mass line effort to destroy America. This is political warfare. This is insurrection. This is a Marxist, communist, and especially Maoist revolution. I'm placing emphasis on Maoist because although the roots of all of this are Marxist and Leninist and derived from the Hegelian dialectic, as Steve explains, the current street insurrection in the United States right now, because of its leading groups that take the lead in the street violence, meaning Antifa and meaning Black Lives Matter movement groups, and these are all groups, this is plural. Each one of these, Antifa and BLM, is an umbrella group comprised of many, many, many affiliated, some more closely, some less closely affiliated subgroups. But I say Maoist because while Antifa in particular was Soviet and Marxist, Antifa is short for anti-fascist, as I'm sure you know, and it derives from the German Antifaschistische Aktion. And again, as I said, because the Russians, after the revolution, thought that Germany would be the most fertile place for the next communist revolution to take hold, that is where they went. But as we know, in the 20s and into the 30s, in Germany came the rise of the fascists, of the Nazis. And so there was fighting. There was violent fighting on the streets in Germany, elsewhere in Europe too, between the communist black shirts and the Nazi fascist brown shirts. I see a lot of confusion in social media and other places these days about the distinction between black shirts and brown shirts, between fascism and communism. These are different things. They fought viciously against one another, certainly in the streets of Germany, back in the 20s and more so in the 30s of the last century. Just very briefly, fascism is nationalist. It is very much rooted in a nationalist ideal, like the Third Reich. Even though that reached out to conquer other places, it was nationalist based. National Socialist, that's what Nazi means, that's where it comes from. While communism, obviously, Comintern, is international, intends the ideology not to be nationalist in any way, but rather global. Fascism is very much focused on really awful things like eugenics and the extermination of gene pool members in their assessment who don't deserve to be part of the gene pool. And of course, this focused most heavily on the Jewish people, of course, but others too, the Roma people and those with disabilities. The genocide against these people by the Nazis is very much a factor of fascist ideology. But even though communism certainly murdered millions, hundreds of millions if you count Soviet Union and China, it wasn't because of these racial identifiers or Judaism or Jewishness. It was for other reasons. Communism, of course, puts the focus on the destruction of the capitalist free market system. Fascism does not do that at all. Communism wants to destroy the banks, wants to abolish all private property. You can find all of this in the Communist Manifesto. Oh, I put it away. I was reaching for Mein Kampf, a much thicker book. It's about yay thick. It'll take much longer to get through. But you won't find the destruction of the banks, abolition of private property, or the destruction of the free market capitalist system in Mein Kampf. It's just not part of fascism. So all of those things do mark the distinctions between these ideologies, even if we do see them both acting in very violent ways on the streets. But that's what they did back in the 20s and 30s against each other in the streets of Europe. But now, and here I'm coming back to Mao again, the reason that I'm talking about Maoism, or that this is a Maoist revolution, is because of the close identification, ideologically speaking, of these groups in the streets today, in particular the Black Lives Matter movement groups, which arose out of, yes, Marxism as an ideology, but specifically a group called the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and one of its offshoots called Liberation Road. Both of those have websites online. You can go look them up. They're there and everything they stand for, and you will see a very forthright, declaration of allegiance and loyalty and affiliation with Maoist thinking. And so why Maoist? Well, in particular with the Black revolutionaries in this country, the roots of the connections with Beijing go way back to the 1960s, as a matter of fact. And in the late 60s and on into the 1970s, groups like the Black Panthers, led by people like Bobby Seale, Huey P. Newton, Elizabeth Brown, Stokely Carmichael, these figures would travel over to Beijing repeatedly to meet directly with and photo ops with Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai. And the Chinese, although horrifically racist against anyone who is not a Han Chinese, I mean racist against, the captive people of their own empire, like Manchus or Uyghurs or Tibetans or Mongols. Even at that level, racism, but certainly racism against Africans, anyone perceived to be Black African, or African American. Nevertheless, these ties were very close and ongoing and repeated visits. Today's Black revolutionaries, African American revolutionaries, are descendants, at least ideologically speaking, of those Black Panthers and those like them, affiliated with them. Now, we don't see the same kind of delegations going from the United States over to Beijing these days. We don't. And I suspect that it has as much to do with caution, plausible deniability, on the part of Xi Jinping, the ruler of China, as it does with anything else. But that said, the affiliation, the identification of these groups with Maoism is clear and plain and out in the open for anyone to see. The other thing that I would mention here, perhaps only in passing, is China has diplomatic representations across the United States. Of course, its main embassy is in Washington, D.C. Its United Nations embassy representation, I should say, is in New York City. And then there are consulates. And previously there were 5 consulates. New York City had a consulate in addition to the UN mission, plus Chicago, Houston, Washington, D.C. was the embassy, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. So the United States and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo took the decision a few months ago to close down China's Houston consulate. So that one is no longer open, it's closed. But the others remain open. And in particular, the consulate out in San Francisco is one that really, in my opinion at least, ought to have a lot more attention paid to it. Maybe there is attention being paid, and I sure hope so, that we don't necessarily all know about. In any case, I suspect that it's out of these consulates across the United States that ongoing relationships between Beijing and Black African American revolutionaries continues. Certainly, we know that in the sphere of social media, the Chinese Communist Party, under the direction of the Central Committee, has a group that's called the United Front Work Department. These names are always like that. United Front Work Department answers to the Chinese Communist Party's Central Committee. And it has responsibility for all propaganda inside of China to filter what the Chinese population itself is allowed to see on the internet or anywhere else, TV, radio, as well as abroad, and meaning here too, in the United States. And I'll finish this little section right here by saying that every major media entity in the United States, be it the print media, which is online too, but I'm talking about things like the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or the TV, cable, or not just cable, TV channels, the CNNs, the ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, etc., and certainly social media to include Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, obviously TikTok, although I hear today it might have just reached an agreement about selling it, but we'll see about that. Anyway, TikTok. Every single one of these and or its parent company has extensive business interests inside of China. Business interests nobody wants to jeopardize in a market that's seen as the potential for 1.4 billion and counting potential customers. So if you wonder why just about all of the news, except for Epoch Times, which is a tremendous outlet, Epoch Times, EPOCH Times, online. You can also get it in hard copy, delivered print newspaper if you would like. Does an excellent job of honestly reporting about what goes on inside of China and abroad, China and the rest of us. But in any case, because of that influence, you're just not going to see any discussion, for example, of what happened at Tiananmen Square. What happened to the Tibetan people? What happened to Hong Kong? You're just not going to see it. They're not going to touch it. Epoch Times will, though. In any case, all of that, I think, is taking the place perhaps today in terms of influence operations, propaganda, agitprop, you might call it, taking the place of those very open, overt, delegation trips to China by the Black Panthers and those revolutionaries back in the day. Just my assessment about it. Now, let's come back and finish this up. We're just about there, I promise. Using back to critical race theory and how this all ties in together with the street insurrection. Using racism, white supremacy accusations, critical race theory acts as the battering ram to delegitimize America itself. You heard the saying, silence is violence. That's not brand new, really. It proceeds from Western European neo-Marxist corruption of the language. Hate speech codes were the precursor to the codification of hate speech and hate crimes in law, which is now a fact in Europe, especially Western Europe. We who attended some of the OSCE meetings, Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe meetings in Warsaw, Poland. I only went a couple of times, but good friends, again, Steve Coughlin, Christine Brim, and the leader of our PAC, Austrian, wonderful dear friend and superb champion of free speech, Elizabeth Sabadich-Wolf, all attended those meetings from time to time over the years, OSCE meetings. We saw the development of this codification of hate speech, the criminalization or the attempt to criminalize speech in codified law as hate speech, taking shape at those meetings. We tried to warn people, we tried to come back, but people here, including our own think tanks, just weren't even interested at all. Now, in collaboration with the global Islamic movement, because that comes into the red, black, green axis too, here in the United States, that's represented mostly in the vanguard by the Muslim Brotherhood. By the way, the Muslim Brotherhood first explicitly backed the Black Lives Matter movement back in December of 2015 at a conference. But the Brotherhood here is now far more proactive and vocal now, especially online, yes, at their own homepages and on social media. But they talk about Islamophobia as the definition or being defined as anti-Muslim racism. But you see how this all comes together. Overall, then, the intent of all of these is to abolish our First Amendment guarantee the right of free speech, to silence and criminalize all dissent, and to coerce proactive speech, that conforms to the Marxist Muslim agenda. And that, of course, is an end to the American Republic. Speech codes with critical race theory and all of that, that was the beginning. That started it. We didn't pay attention. We didn't stop it. It's now given way, inevitably, to street violence, which is the enforcement mechanism of those codes and of the Marxist Maoist agenda. So this is the weaponization of racism. This is using intimidation and outright violence to delegitimize, defund, and ultimately disband the police. By the way, let me pull another little book up here very quickly. The Communist Attack on U.S. Police, written by W. Cleon Skousen, one of my new favorite authors, former FBI agent. That book, written in 1966, taken from communist testimony before congressional committees, about the communist priority to delegitimize the police and ultimately disband them, thereby destroying law and order and then dissolving American society into total chaos, out of which revolutionaries of every stripe intend to seize power. Each one thinks it'll come out on top, right? Okay, final analysis, and I'll close this up. United States leadership, national security leadership, even now under the Trump administration, have been only dimly aware, up until recently anyway, of the Marxist Hegelian roots of today's street insurrection. The soy boy, skinny arm kids out on the street, they don't know this stuff either. But the Antifa and Black Lives Matter movement leadership absolutely does. You certainly heard Patrisse Cullors in that video from 2015 declaring that she and another co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, Alicia Garza, were trained Marxists, right? I'm sure you all saw that. All of this began in the information battle space, just like Islam coming to the West, that is, in the current day, in the modern day times. Yes, and yes, there is crossover between them. That's a whole nother evening, I think, of talking about this. But the United States, by our nature, we the people of the United States, by our nature and disposition, we're not well equipped to wage information warfare or agitprop propaganda. Our strength, military strength, tends to the kinetic, the overwhelming application of armed force, and we do that very well. But the ideological warfare of the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist kind, not so much. Never mind the Hegelian dialectic. Thus, we've been badly outmaneuvered. We've allowed Marxism into the schools. John Dewey, a disciple of the Frankfurt School, all the rest of it. See my recent series from June, July, and August now. At the Front Page Magazine, I've written so far a series of 4 articles at Front Page Magazine about the Marxist infiltration into the curricula of school systems across the country. But that curricula, that's plural, is ubiquitous. Multiple generations have already been indoctrinated. See again, another book of mine, chapter 13, Naked Communist. I've talked about this book before, same author, W. Cleon Skousen again, written that one in 1958. Chapter 13 is the 45 Goals of Communism Today, again, taken from communist testimony before congressional committees in the 1950s. He just wrote it down for us. Number 17 of that list of 45 goals, get control of the schools, put communism into the textbooks. They did it. Check mark in front of that one. Again, much of this we know. He knew when he wrote this, W. Cleon Skousen. Got it from testimonies, I said, before Senator Joseph McCarthy's committee. That man was a patriot. His name should never, ever be allowed to be denigrated. He was a hero and a patriot, Senator Joseph McCarthy, and also the counterpart House on Un-American Activities Committee from the early 1950s, Bella Dodd and others, former communists who testified there. Now, it's not just the schools. That's bad enough. It's really bad enough. But critical race theory has also infiltrated and penetrated the entirety, all of the United States government, including DOD, Department of Defense, the Pentagon, the military, all of our cabinet departments, Department of Education. I think we've talked about this. Don't know where Betsy DeVos is, AWOL. But this has been the Gramsci, if indeed it was Gramsci who said this, there's some doubt about that, but never mind, Gramsci gets attributed for it. The long march through the institutions, right? We didn't even notice. We thought that communism was defeated along with the USSR, the Soviet Union, back in the early 1990s. Not. Okay, final thoughts. The bad news first. The Democrat Party, the Democratic Socialists of America that dominates it, has been virtually taken over by AOC, the Biden wing of the party, and the Kamala Harris Marxists. See online the Bernie Biden Unity Task Force recommendations, 110-page document. Yes, I read it all. They put their thoughts together. I don't mean Biden. I'm not sure if he has any thoughts anymore, but Bernie and this left-wing cabal, AOC, Kamala certainly, task force recommendations. And then the Democrat Party 2020 platform, which follows it in many respects, even word for word in some places. And then lay the two of them side by side, could have been quoted, probably was quoted, directly from the Communist Manifesto. Obviously, Joe Biden has no clue. But I'll tell you what, Comrade Kamala does. Now, here's some good news. We've got to finish with good news, right? Fox News' Tucker Carlson has been on fire lately. He had a guest named Christopher Rufo of the Discovery Institute on his show back on the 2nd of September. And Rufo called out critical race theory as, quote, default ideology of the federal bureaucracy, which is now being weaponized against the American people, end quote. I think, more good news, that Trump probably is becoming more aware of what this is. I think he probably watches Tucker. And I think also that maybe Steve Coughlin's papers are being channeled to the White House, to the president for him to read. I sure hope so. But in recent rally speeches, and certainly the Republican National Committee acceptance speech of, what, week and more ago, the president directly called the Bernie Biden Dems Marxists. He used that word repeatedly. He said they're Marxists. And he calls that Bernie Biden set of recommendations that I talked about a manifesto. He said that multiple times too. Obviously, he's referring to the similarity to the Communist Manifesto. So I think some of this is getting through, and I think that's good news. 4th of September, just last week, the Office of Management and Budget out of the White House, Director Russell Vogt, V-O-U-G-H-T, issued a memorandum to all federal agencies and organizations ordering them to, quote, cease and desist all critical race theory training. That's a good sign. Then 2 days later, it was over the previous weekend, the weekend before, on 6th of September, President Trump tweeted out that he would halt all federal funding to California schools that taught the 1619 Project, which of course, as you know, is a distortion of American history to make it all about race and slavery. So let's conclude here with the hope that these initiatives now beginning to be taken, these references that show awareness of the problem, begin to be extended throughout the entire United States government, and most especially to the Department of Education and all U.S. public schools, insofar as funding goes, federal funding I'm talking about here, preschool, K through 12, university. It'll be a huge job. It'll be facing massive opposition that's had decades of head start. But to get this out of US government and all of our schools, not just out of the public discourse. So thank you for hanging in there with me. I know this went long, but I thank you very much, and would be happy to take questions if we're able to do that. If not, then Mary and we'll explain how you can reach me or get any questions through to me. Thank you again very much.
No, Claire, we still have time. We'll be able to do these questions. We've got quite a few piled up here from the beginning with the agreement and everything.
Okay.
If you want to go in, jump in ahead of the questions?
No, I think we could go right to the questions, Mary.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got quite a few that are going back to the agreements, the peace agreements that you talked about at the beginning. It seems so odd that the OIC seemingly presents a united Islamic front, but in reality, is there contention between the member states? Is the OIC really a weak unit?
The OIC is, of course, all the governments that are Islamic, 57 of them in the world. But yes, there are very serious divisions among them. I mean, as we know from history, 1400 years almost of it, you know, Islamic forces, caliphates, what countries have always fought one another. And within the OIC in particular right now, the division would be along Sunni Shiite lines. And as I said before, Shiite Iran lines up in a loose alignment right now with Turkey, which is Sunni, but still aligned with the Shiites, and Qatar, which is Sunni also, but aligning with the Shiite regime in Tehran. But that's where the fault line is mainly right now, between Sunni and Shiite.
Good. Okay, we've got somebody asking about the peace agreement where the Arabs are not recognizing Judea and Samaria as sovereign Israel territory. What do you think will happen?
As we said before, part of the terms of the normalization of relations with the UAE and now with Bahrain are the terms are that Israel will at least postpone or shelve any plans to apply its legal sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and parts of Judea and Samaria. That, as we said, it's been much criticized as a concession, but it is a shelving. It is not on the Israeli side to be permanent, but it is certainly a shelving for an indeterminate period of time right now. Yes, that's true.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions because they're asking similar information. One says, is it not yet another form of Muslim deception? Muhammad viewed agreements as a means of advancing Islam in time of weakness. Are the US and Israel being manipulated? Well,
yes and no. I mean, obviously, we talked about a hudna, and it's supposed to last, according to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, as the example, back in, what was it, 638, with Muhammad and the Meccans, supposed to last for 10 years. You know, what was it, 2+ years on? The Muslim forces under Muhammad recouped their strength, marched into Mecca without even a fight. The gates were open to them, conquered Mecca just like that. So that example is still there, yes. But when you look at the way the peace treaties with Egypt, between Israel and Egypt, between Israel and Jordan have held all these decades, there is certainly hope that these opening normalization of relationships also will, first of all, establish facts on the ground. That's what they're doing. And then last. And the longer they last, the more interwoven connections there will be at commercial levels, medical levels, academic levels, you name it. And that's what they're trying to weave, a network of connections that is so dense that it would be very, very difficult to undo. I'll never say that that would be something impossible, but that's the intent. That's what they're trying to do.
What are your thoughts on the critical race theory? Sounds a lot like China's developing social scoring system.
Yeah, in a way. And there are more similarities too. When we look at some of these, I don't know, commercial companies and even within the US government, by the way, the impetus we think for the president directing Russell Vogt of the OMB to issue that memorandum to stop all critical race theory training within the government. We think that the initiative for that, or the impetus for that, came from an incident that was revealed by a whistleblower out of the Sandia labs in New Mexico, where apparently only the white, I think male, all the white men of Sandia were forced into critical race theory training sessions. So things like that, and things that we see elsewhere throughout the commercial world now and academia, where people are, you know, called on the carpet and criticized and abused and insulted and what have you, and then it is demanded of them that they recant, that they apologize, that they make amends. This is nothing so much reminiscent as of struggle sessions, they call them, struggle sessions of the Cultural Revolution under Mao in the 1960s in China. So yes, to that question, absolutely there are similarities here.
Bill Ayers was such a part of the 60s revolution. We haven't heard anything about him during this uprising. Do you think he is advising behind the scenes?
Well, I'm pulling out my printed out copy of something called, I hope you can see that there, Prairie Fire. Prairie Fire was written, I think the early 1970s, probably by Bill Ayers. And it was the manifesto, essentially. I think I bumped this. Essentially the manifesto of the Weather Underground. And you say, well, what happened to them? Literally, these guys, well, and Bernadine Dorn and others, women too, set off bombs at federal buildings like courthouses, and yes, even the Pentagon. Not huge bombs, but bombs. They never were convicted on charges of those offenses. They never went to jail. What happened to Bill Ayers? Well, what happens to all good revolutionaries? They go into academia. He became a professor.
He did.
In the University of Illinois system, taught for many years at the University of Chicago. How many generations of students had their brains twisted and warped by this guy? And as I understand it, now he is retired.
Yeah, good, I think. Okay, the critical race theory executive order that Trump did recently, is there a letter associated to it, and is it somewhere that can be found?
Yes, the letter that went out through the Office of Management and Budget, I'm paging through my little pile here, here it is. This memo right here came out of the Office of Management and Budget from the director, Russell Vogt, on September the 4th. And if you go online, yes, you would be able to find this. Look up, let's see, look up Office of Management and Budget, I think, and then together with it, put training in the federal government, put critical race theory. I think this will come up. That, I mean, I found it online. It's definitely online. You can find it if you do a little search. You'll get it.
Okay, let's see. Somebody's asking about a Michael Caputo's statements on Facebook that, and I'm reading a little bit here, that I think they're referencing Michael R. Caputo, the Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at the Department of Health and Human Services, accused the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and Prevention of harboring a resistance unit determined to undermine President Trump, even if that opposition bolsters the COVID-19 death toll. And apparently did it live on Facebook. What are your thoughts?
I think I've heard about that. I did not see it directly myself. I believe I've heard about that. you know, remember back, it's been weeks already now, that when the president and the vice president, Mike Pence, and the White House coronavirus task force were doing those very regular, you know, coronavirus pandemic briefings, press briefings on a daily basis. At one point, and it couldn't have been any later than, I don't know, July perhaps, that Dr. Deborah Birx just very openly at the microphone in front of the camera said she didn't trust any numbers coming out of the CDC. And it was not long after, well, a month perhaps, just a few weeks ago, I think, maybe 2 or 3 in August 2020 here, that the CDC on its website, and this I did see for myself and I looked it up, buried a little note, a little notice to the effect that after it, you know, went back and reviewed all the numbers, and after claiming that 80-odd thousand people in America had died of this China virus, that, oh, we got that kind of wrong, and, you know, only 6% of that total actually can be attributed only to the coronavirus without any other accompanying comorbidities, and that for all the rest of those numbers, by the way, 6% of that total came out to be something, it was more or less around 10,000, right, as I recall, roughly. Yeah. But that all the rest that had been attributed to the coronavirus, in fact, had an average of 2.6 other comorbidities, really life-threatening situations like heart disease, like a stroke, like diabetes, and so forth. Right. So I can see why many no longer trust the CDC or any numbers coming out of it.
Okay, this I think is our last one. The Federalist had an article about the Ford Foundation funding insurrectionist, deconstructionist groups. Ford has former Obama administration people affiliated with it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's not just the Ford Foundation. I mean, there have been lists out there of the very many companies and so-called philanthropic foundations that have donated millions and millions and millions of dollars to the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is without even factoring in George Soros, who is everybody's favorite boogeyman. Take him out of it, and it hardly makes a blip with all the millions from the rest. Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Plowshares Foundation, Tides Foundation, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Taco Bell, Airbnb, DoorDash. These are just the ones off the top of my head that I'm remembering. But there are dozens and dozens and dozens of them that have donated millions and continue to do so to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, that's all of our questions for tonight.
Okay.
So great job. The only thing I would add to that is that, I don't know if you've seen that, the Heritage Organization has started to put ads on huge buildings that say no,
oh, yes,
no police, no peace. Isn't that incredible?
Enormous.
Yes, huge, tall buildings they're putting on.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, good to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. I was going to say one more thing. There's going to be, for tomorrow's signing, you mentioned how all the protesters are going to be. There's a group called Jews Choose Trump are going to be there as well, protesting for Bibi. So
there will be a counter-protest, yes, calling all who would counter-protest those who are going to come out tomorrow.
And what a clairvoyant W. Cleon Skousen was in writing what he did back then. Isn't that amazing?
Well, I would say not clairvoyant, because he wasn't particularly enlightened or even looking ahead. I'm not denigrating him in any way.
No, I know.
But what he was doing was simply transcribing, in a way, all the information he had taken from the hearings in front of Congress of the early 1950s. I mean, even before the 50s, but certainly 51, 52, 53. And it was so voluminous
Yeah.
that he decided, you know, to put it into a more accessible format for the American reader. And that's why he wrote these books and more after.
Well, tell us what's going on this Thursday with you.
Right, that's what I was going to get to. So I work with Bishop E.W. Jackson, an absolutely brilliant evangelical Protestant bishop. And he has organized across the United States a network of groups that go under the banner STAND, S-T-A-N-D, and in particular, Stand Against Communism. Well, as part of that effort, we have organized for this coming Thursday, 17 September, which is Constitution Day, a special day when we will live stream a complete reading of the U.S. Constitution. Many of us will be taking part. I will have a part in that. Of course, so will Bishop E.W. Trevor Loudon will be there. Jerry Corsi will be there, and many others. This will go on, as you see on the website here, between 2 and 5 p.m. Thursday, this September 17 afternoon Eastern Time. And you can follow it, if you would like to, at this Facebook page of the bishop, which is the Stand America Facebook page. But you could also just look up Bishop E.W. Jackson, and it'll bring you to it. You can live stream that on your cell phone, on your laptop, your computer. But we will be doing a complete reading of the Constitution. And I should also say that morning on Tom Trento's live stream broadcast radio show out of Southern Florida, Bishop E.W. Jackson will be Tom's guest. I believe the time is 9:15, is that right?
About 9:15, 9:20. He's going to
9:15, 9:20 in the morning at the United West .com? I'm sorry, unitedwest.org website. You can watch it live stream, or you can catch it over the radio where it is broadcasted. I'm sure Mary has those coordinates for you all.
WWNN is the radio station that broadcasts, but it's on iHeartRadio as well, so it's across international. So it's going to be a great show with E.W. Jackson and the Constitution on Constitution Day. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Just to give everybody where this is at, and Dick, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it says standamerica.us, I believe, right?
That's right.
Right, standamerica.us is the website.
Okay, so that folks can know where exactly to go.
What about the other issue that we might want to talk about, Claire? There's a vote against communist.
Oh, right. So this is an image from our website. It is a special website we stood up as a project of Stand Against Communism, and we call it Vote Against Communist Democrats. And this is a project that will last through until November the 3rd, Election Day. And we use this website to highlight the Marxist, Leninist, communist ideology, pronouncements, statements, recommendations, policies of the Democrat Party, and certainly of the Democratic Socialists of America that dominate the Democrat Party. So at this website, you will find many resources, lots of the books, for example, and essays that I mentioned or showed to you tonight are at the resources tab up there. And there are many other, there we go, with all of those right there. You can click right into them. Many of those available online at Amazon.com. And many other resources there at this website, to include on the homepage a constantly refreshing list of current news items that highlight, I mean, I have to tell you, they're just handing this stuff to us on a silver platter. If we scroll down the page some more, we come to the list of the current, beyond the issues, we come to the current news items that our tremendous tech team posts up here for us on a regular basis. And I mean, you just can't even make this stuff up. But have a look. I won't even get into all of it. Some of the really good videos, Riding the Dragon. This is a Peter Schweitzer short, not terribly long, documentary. Came out September the 4th, last week, about the very close ongoing financial ties between the Bidens, meaning Biden family, and the Chinese Communist Party. So have a look at this website. I think you'll find a lot there that's informative and hopefully interesting too.
And he could be our president. Oh.
Claire, let's just go back to the two topics tonight and talk about Joe Biden as the president. What happens to the first topic about Israel and the Gulf states, and then what happens to America with Black Lives Matter and that energy, the critical race theory under Joe Biden? If you could just touch on those 2 points and maybe we'll be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's remember, of course, Joe Biden was vice president for the 8 years during which Barack Obama was president. And it was during that time that the United States probably had its absolute worst spate of relations with Israel, and personal relationship between the president of the United States, Barack Obama, and the prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So all of that would likely be turned back. But again, that's another reason for establishing as quickly and as densely as possible that network of connections that I'm talking about between these countries and Israel, between now and whenever. You know, if President Trump is reelected, of course, things will go on even better and better, but between Israel and the United States. But if not, the connections that are being forged right now likely will endure, just because they're in the interests of all involved over there, not just American national security interests, which they are, but also the interest of Israel and the interests of these various different countries in the Middle East. And then as far as critical race theory, well, we can see, and you can find a lot of this at the websites that Mary just showed you. You know, this will be the theme, this will be the watchword of a Biden-Harris presidency. If we think that freedom of speech is under assault now, just wait.
Oh yeah.
Until they, if they were to win the election.
So just a comment, I would invite all of our listeners, the action items we're really going to talk about is we really need to bear down in the remaining 50 some days that are left. And one way to do that is Mary will be posting this presentation, and we'll be sending out information about how to access it. This is the thing you want to show to people. You want to show people what Clare Lopez thinks about these important topics. You want to use those opportunities to begin to talk and find other people of like mind. Make sure they're registered, make sure they're going to vote, but of all things, make sure they understand just how serious these topics really, really are, how it will affect us all personally, our families, our churches, our communities, let alone the entire country. So the ball is in your court. We bring these materials to you. We're so grateful to Clare and our other news analysts. The ball is in your hands now. Please make the most of these resources. Thank you very much. I guess, Mary and Clare, do you have any final comments? And we'll say good night.
I will just say thank you to you both. Thank you to Sharia Crime Stoppers, the United West. You can find more of my work and videos like these, as well as my published writings at places like American Truth Project, Citizens Commission on National Security, at Brannon House's World View Weekend website. And then I also post regularly on social media, at Facebook, at Twitter, at Parlay, and I am at Clare M. Lopez there. So please have a look and follow if you will.
Thank you, Clare. And one last comment, there's a new social media you might want to check out, magabook.com. It's very similar to Facebook, so there's many of these new social media platforms starting up, and it's good to hear and good to see, because We're getting shut down everywhere we turn on Facebook and Twitter. So just check it out. But one last thing I would say is I second what Dick said. Please get involved, get engaged, get your community, and get them out to vote. We need the votes across the platform to make sure that we stay a constitutional republic. It's critical. It is beyond critical. So we appreciate everybody being here tonight, and thank you. And I come back next Monday and we will have another platform for you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.